it would appear that in the near future, we're going to get a new Battlefield campaign. It could be a campaign attached to a proper multiplayer Battlefield game, like we had in BF3 and BF4, or it could be a standalone single-player game set in the Battlefield universe. Now, there's some information that's come out online, and this is not based on leaks, this is based on facts, and that's why I wanted to do a video on this and cover it, because it's real. And this has all stemmed from a job application on the EA website of the new Battlefield Seattle studio. So a bit of context for you, in December of last year, after the launch of BF 2042, a lot of the heads at DICE stepped down, the general manager stepped down, and they hired a bunch of new people, and they released an article where they announced that Vince Zampella would now be in charge of the series, if you will. They announced Rebecca Kutaz as the new GM of DICE, and they announced a new studio in Seattle. And that's the important thing to note here. They said at the time that this would be headed by Marcus Leto. He's one of the co-creators of the Halo universe. And now on his Twitter bio, it says Game Director at Battlefield, Narrative at EA. So we knew about that. We knew that they were making a new studio in Seattle for Battlefield. But back in December, we didn't really know what they'd be working on apart from this that they said here. And this, I think, was open to interpretation. So we'll read this. It said that the studio in Seattle will be working on world building and narrative within the Battlefield franchise. EA indicated that each is working on a new experience in the Battlefield universe. That doesn't explicitly mean that these will both take the forms of games. The experiences terminology allows some wiggle room for what they will turn out to be. We intend to build a Battlefield universe, one with multiple projects that are interconnected with the player at the center. And then Leto himself said on Twitter, we're building a new studio from scratch in the Seattle area, so I'm looking for core leadership in many disciplines. If you've got 5 to 10 years of FPS experience, love the idea of working in the Battlefield universe and want to help build an awesome team, please reach out. So in December of last year, lots of grey areas, but we're going to take a look now at what's been updated and this job application that I just mentioned. So this role that they're advertising for is Design Director, Battlefield Seattle Studio. Previously, this studio didn't have a name, and Battlefield Seattle Studio could still be just a temporary name. I'd imagine it probably is, and they just don't want to reveal the name yet, but for the time being, they're obviously dedicated to Battlefield. There's a bit more context at the start of the advertisement. BF Seattle is focused on building rich, exciting stories with memorable characters and powerful experiences, all in the Battlefield universe. We're building a new studio in the Seattle area composed of leaders and talent with a vast array of AAA game dev experience. As we assemble our diverse team, all who have a voice in making great games together, we're looking for a healthy mixture of tempered veterans and young, passionate individuals eager to make a difference. And then it goes into the role overview, and this is where we get the actual detail. Reporting to the studio general manager, you will manage the design and design vision of a new Battlefield campaign. I mean, that's as pretty clear-cut as you can get, isn't it? Your job is to orchestrate the mission design, narrative, game mechanics, and systems to create the highest quality experience possible. You foster relationships with creative engineering and production to create an inclusive design team. Your job is to embrace the core tenets of the Battlefield franchise and make sure that they're woven through all layers of a masterfully designed single-player campaign. You will build the studio's design team and culture and build an amazing campaign from concept through release. You are also responsible for leading iteration of the product design based on feedback from peers, company partners, and team members while holding to the core vision. So there's actually quite a lot to unpack there, I think. Based on that description though, and the fact that the studio was only set up in December, this is obviously very early days for this game, whether it's a campaign for a future Battlefield game or a standalone single-player Battlefield game, establishing some kind of a universe. We don't know yet. My best guess here is that this Seattle studio will completely oversee the single player for the next core Battlefield title. And that will be used for world building, for introducing characters, and tying that into the narrative of the multiplayer, which although 2042 does have some, it's not that strong, and they've not really leaned into it that much so far. Obviously, the game had a lot of issues, and I think they've just been focused on fixing those first and getting it up to speed before diving into the narrative and story. Of course, in other shooter games that are multiplayer PvP and have a battle pass system, live service like Warzone, Fortnite, they have a lot of story beats in them, and it helps to connect the players to the universe a bit more. 2042 hasn't done a good job of that at all. So I reckon that's what this is. I think in a couple years time, we will have a new Battlefield multiplayer game. I reckon they're going to go back to basics with it. I think they're going to bring back classes. I think they're going to go 64 players. I think they're going to lean into destruction, smaller maps with more of a focus on infantry. But at the same time, I think what the studio are developing is a single player campaign for that game. That makes the most sense for me at the moment. But of course, I could be completely wrong and off base with this one. The job description continues with some responsibilities. A couple of the most interesting ones here. Define and lead the design efforts necessary for creating a best-in-class single-player campaign experience. And then start with a player-first mentality motivated by a passionate aim to understand and serve the players who are engaged with the game. So that's all so far, but this is real. And it's essentially confirming that rather than this studio just being an effort to make more narrative in the multiplayer, they are actually going to go back and make a single-player campaign. But it would seem it's a dedicated studio, so Seattle focuses on the single-player, DICE focuses on the multiplayer. We'll see how it turns out. Interesting for sure. I have to say that for me personally, I feel 50-50 about this. Yeah, we don't really know much about it at all, and it's just the beginning of it. So I don't think it would be fair to be judgmental about this already. However, from my experiences, I haven't really enjoyed a Battlefield single player game since Battlefield 3. Before that, Bad Company 2, loved it. BF4 had some cool moments in it. BF1 and 5, they went for the war stories style. And I liked a couple of them, but it didn't really have a cohesive narrative and you weren't given enough time to care about the characters because each of the war stories was just like 40 minutes long and they weren't connected to each other in any way apart from, hey, it's World War I in BF1 and then World War II in BF5. So it was just like, okay, I've done this, next. So that's how it felt for me anyway. But BF3, if they go back to that kind of style where there's an overall story and there's a beginning and an end and you're getting to know the characters and you're learning things that you might take into the multiplayer, I think that could be cool. And the fact that Marcus Leto was one of the original co-creators of Halo, that makes me think that perhaps they might lean into a more open world approach in some of the missions. Also, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I've got it in my head that making single player campaigns for first person shooters is incredibly expensive. And I seem to recall reading in an interview somewhere that for Battlefield 4, 50% of the entire budget of the game was taken up by the single player campaign, which means that these things are super expensive to make. So there must be a concerted effort going into this and a lot of money. But as a long-term Battlefield fan since BF 1942, I'd love the focus to be the multiplayer first because I feel like that's what Battlefield does best. So the fact that they're making this at a separate studio, that makes me think that this won't impact the multiplayer that much. Don't know that for a fact, of course. And I'm down for a new Battlefield single player campaign. I think there's still room in modern FPS games for cool campaigns like that. BF3, as I mentioned, a lot of the nostalgia and fond memories of BF3 for me personally come from the campaign as well as the multiplayer because it just had some sick levels in it and scenarios, cool military hardware, a couple of twists and turns in there. The graphics were gritty and realistic. Modern Warfare 19, that's another great example. Campaigning that was great, short but sweet. MW2 looks like it's shaping up nicely as well. So even though they're expensive, and I don't think they should be the focus, I definitely think there's still room for those kind of campaigns in primarily multiplayer shooters. But with that said, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, guys. How do you feel about this one? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you didn't, a dislike. Subscribe for more. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.